We've missed 2 penalties in matches after that, and we've had chances to go and win games, and we've been in winning positions, which has been disappointing. But I do feel that it's better.
Denis Irwin won everything. Premier League titles, FA Cups, a Champions League and a career at Old Trafford that Alex Ferguson once called the best signing he ever made for the money. Quiet, reliable, almost invisible in the way only the truly elite can be. But put him in front of a camera and ask him which wingers made his life hell, and the diplomat disappears. What's left is a defender who spent a decade facing the best wide players in the world, and he remembers every single one of them. These are the 7 wingers Denis Irwin absolutely hated playing against.
I'm Oliver, and this is Sport Icons.
Let's start with the one that nobody saw coming. Not a fierce opponent from a rival club, not a foreign superstar arriving in the Premier League with a reputation already attached. The winger who gave Denis Irwin some of his toughest afternoons was his own teammate. Ryan Giggs in training was a different proposition from Ryan Giggs in a match. That sounds strange until you think about what it actually meant. In a match, defenders had shape, structure and organised cover behind them. In training at Carrington, Irwin was often left 1-against-1 against a 21-year-old with the kind of pace and dribbling ability that made Premier League fullbacks look ordinary. And Giggs wasn't going easy on his teammates. He went at them the same way he went at everyone else. Irwin has joked about it openly, saying that training against Giggs was sometimes harder than the actual matches. There's honesty in that joke. When your most difficult opponent in any given week is wearing the same training kit as you, it tells you something about how special that player really was. Irwin faced John Barnes and David Ginola and Mark Overmars, and still found time to admit that the Welshman turning him inside out on a Tuesday morning in Manchester ranked alongside all of it. Giggs' pace in his prime was a genuine weapon, the kind that didn't just beat defenders but broke their confidence. His dribbling wasn't just quick, it was clever, always moving at an angle that forced a defender to make a decision they couldn't win. And the conditions of training made it worse. There was no crowd noise to settle into, no pre-match routine to sharpen the focus. Just Giggs picking up the ball 30 yards out and deciding he was going to go past you, with the rest of the squad watching. Irwin couldn't afford to switch off for a second because Giggs didn't switch off. That daily pressure, 5 days a week across an entire season, sharpened Irwin into a better defender than he might otherwise have been. Giggs still gave him problems regardless. That's the clearest measure of what Giggs was. John Barnes was a different kind of problem entirely. Where Giggs came at you with pace and instinct, Barnes came at you with everything at once. And that combination was what made him so difficult to defend against for so long. Barnes at his peak in the late 1980s and into the 1990s was as complete a wide player as English football produced in that era. Irwin has spoken about him with genuine respect, calling him one of the most complete wide players he encountered throughout his career. That's not a throwaway compliment from a man who played alongside Giggs and faced half the Premier League's best. Barnes earned that assessment. The physical side of it was real. Barnes wasn't a small, slight winger who needed space to operate. He was strong enough to hold his position when a defender got tight, strong enough to ride a challenge and keep going, strong enough to make it extremely difficult to knock him off the ball. You couldn't bully him. You couldn't commit hard and expect to win it cleanly. He'd take the contact and still come out with the ball. Then there was the technical ability on top of it. The dribbling, the crossing, the capacity to go past a defender on the outside or cut inside, depending on what the moment required. Barnes didn't have a single move he repeated until opponents adapted. He read what was in front of him and found a different answer each time. And he did it without telegraphing anything. Other wingers shifted their weight, dropped a shoulder, gave you a fraction of a second to read the intent. Barnes had a way of disguising the decision until it was already made, so that by the time you'd committed, he was already past you. For a defender trying to set a line and hold it, that combination of power and disguise was exhausting across 90 minutes. Irwin felt every bit of it. If Barnes tested you physically and technically, Chris Waddle tested something else. He tested your ability to predict what came next, and with Waddle, you usually couldn't. Waddle built his entire game on unpredictability. His dribbling style was unusual, almost ungainly at moments, the kind of movement that didn't follow the lines a defender expected. He'd shift his weight one way and go another, not with the clean explosiveness of a pace merchant, but with a subtlety that left opponents standing still wondering what just happened. Defenders Defenders who prided themselves on reading the game found that their preparation meant almost nothing once Waddle got the ball at his feet and started moving. He was among the most gifted wingers of his era, a consistent problem for defenders at every level he played. Fullbacks and wide defenders across English football found that the conventional rules of defending against a winger didn't quite apply to him. The usual adjustments, get tight early, show him down the line, cut off the inside pass, all became less reliable against someone who could make the ball do things in unexpected directions. For Irwin, a defender whose reputation rested on intelligent positioning and anticipation, facing someone who broke the normal patterns was a specific kind of difficult. You couldn't rely on reading the game the way you usually did. You had to stay lower, react later, and trust your feet more than your head. That was Waddle's gift to opposing fullbacks. He made the game feel less predictable, and less predictable meant more uncomfortable. Make sure to like and subscribe. And now back to the video. The late 1990s brought a new set of challenges to Premier League fullbacks, and when Arsenal signed Mark Overmars in 1997, the challenge took on a very specific shape: pace. Frightening, disorienting, match-altering pace. Irwin has admitted as much directly. Overmars possessed frightening speed. Those are essentially his words, and they're worth sitting with. Denis Irwin was not a slow fullback. He covered ground well, recovered position quickly, and had the kind of defensive intelligence that compensated for a lot. But Overmars ran at a level that made all of that feel insufficient on certain days. The United versus Arsenal matches of the late 1990s were some of the most intense domestic fixtures in English football. Both clubs were competing for the same trophies, and the individual battles across the pitch carried weight that went beyond 90 minutes. Overmars turning up on the opposite flank to Irwin was one of those battles. The Dutch winger didn't just have the pace, he had the awareness to use it at exactly the right moment, accelerating into spaces before defenders could reorganise. What made Overmars genuinely dangerous, rather than just fast, was the combination of his speed with a low centre of gravity that made him difficult to dispossess. He could receive the ball under pressure, hold it for a fraction of a second to set himself, and then be gone before a fullback had committed their weight. The disorienting part wasn't the first run, it was the second and third. Once a fullback had been burned once, the instinct shifted toward caution, toward dropping off a little deeper, giving a yard of space to avoid being caught flat. Overmars read that adjustment and used it. The deeper you dropped, the more time he had to pick his moment. There was no clean answer to it. Against a defender as disciplined as Irwin, who rarely lunged and rarely gave away cheap fouls, that combination still caused real problems. Overmars earned his place on this list not through reputation alone, but through 90-minute performances that proved it repeatedly. Steve McManaman never needed to beat his man in a straight sprint. He caused problems in a completely different way, and that made him one of the most irritating opponents a fullback could face in the Premier League during the 1990s. McManaman's weapon was movement. He drifted, floated, appeared in spaces he had no business being in, and vanished from areas where you'd been tracking him. Traditional wide play involves a winger staying wide, receiving the ball on the flank, and trying to beat a fullback down the line or cut inside. McManaman didn't always play that way. He'd start wide and drift central, picking up positions between the lines where a fullback couldn't follow without leaving a gap, and where a central midfielder hadn't quite expected to find him. For Irwin and Manchester United in Liverpool fixtures, McManaman was a persistent headache. He gave United plenty of problems during those clashes, and the difficulty was organisational as much as individual. When a wide player moves inside, someone has to follow. If the fullback goes, there's space behind. If the fullback stays, the midfielder has to pick up a player who's better technically than most midfielders wanted to handle. That responsibility transferred across the defensive unit, and someone usually ended up carrying it in a position they weren't comfortable with. His ability to drift inside and combine centrally, while still threatening to go wide when defenders adjusted inward, gave Liverpool an attacking flexibility that United had to account for every time these clubs met. McManaman never announced himself the way Overmars or Giggs might announce themselves, with a burst of pace that left defenders flat-footed. He just kept moving until the space appeared, and then he used it. What that meant for Irwin specifically was a constant decision about how far to track, Follow McManaman too deep into central areas and you exposed the channel behind you for an overlapping run. Stay at home and protect the flank, and McManaman had the technical quality to hurt you from inside positions anyway. There wasn't a clean answer. Irwin was a defender who solved problems through positioning and reading the game, but McManaman's movement created a problem that couldn't be fully solved by one player alone. It required the whole defensive unit to shift and compress together, and even then gaps appeared. That organisational burden was what made him genuinely exhausting to play against over 90 minutes. Not every player on this list was a traditional winger. Gianfranco Zola spent his time at Chelsea operating between positions, moving into wide areas and drifting central, creating problems that didn't fit neatly into the category of winger versus fullback. That made him harder to defend, not easier. Irwin has spoken about Zola's intelligence and skill with real admiration. And those two words, intelligence and skill, describe exactly what made him such a difficult assignment. The intelligence meant he always found the space before you expected him to. The skill meant that once he had it, he did something with it. Zola could receive the ball with his back to goal in tight areas and create an opportunity that hadn't existed a second before. He could drift wide and deliver a ball from an angle defenders struggled to read. He could cut inside and shoot, or cut inside and pass, and the delay between a defender knowing which was coming and Zola actually doing it was almost always enough. At Stamford Bridge in the late 1990s, Chelsea built their attacking play around exactly this kind of creativity. Zola as the free agent, the player who didn't stay in one position long enough for defenders to fully account for him. For fullbacks accustomed to tracking a winger's runs and covering the flank, that freedom was a specific kind of difficult to manage. You had to stay engaged mentally for the full 90 minutes, watching for someone who could appear anywhere and make something happen the moment he received the ball. Irwin's praise for Zola says a lot. He reserved genuine admiration for opponents who made him think, and Zola made him think every time they met. The difficulty with Zola wasn't one specific action you could prepare for. It was the accumulation of small decisions he made faster than defenders could process them. Receive, turn, release. Receive, hold, draw a foul. Receive, drift, shoot. Each situation looked similar until it wasn't, and by the time a defender had identified which version was coming, the moment had already passed. For a fullback trying to manage both his defensive position and a player who refused to stay in a predictable area, that continuous mental load was as tiring as any physical battle. Zola didn't need to outrun you. He just needed to outthink you, and across 90 minutes, that was more than enough. David Ginola was something else entirely. Where others on this list tested Irwin's pace, his positioning, or his ability to read unpredictable movement, Ginola tested something harder to quantify. He tested the sheer experience of trying to defend against someone who made the game look effortless while making yours feel impossibly difficult. Irwin has praised Ginola for his flair and elegance, and both of those words carry real meaning in context. Flair, in this case, wasn't decoration. It was functional. Ginola's close control at speed was exceptional, the kind that allowed him to receive the ball under pressure and immediately make a defender decide whether to commit or hold. His unpredictability in those moments was built on technical quality so high that he genuinely had multiple options available to him at any given point, which meant a defender could never fully commit to cutting off one route without opening another. The elegance was also real and also functional. Ginola moved without apparent effort in a way that obscured how quickly things were actually happening. A defender watching him glide across the turf could find themselves fractionally behind the tempo of the play, reacting to what Ginola had already decided rather than anticipating what he was about to do. That half second of delay, repeated across 90 minutes, accumulated into genuine danger. In the Premier League during the mid to late 1990s, Ginola at his best was one of the most entertaining and dangerous wide players in the division. He combined the physicality to hold off defenders with the technical quality to punish them once he had separation. For Irwin, who prided himself on making life difficult for exactly this type of player, Ginola represented the kind of opponent you could defend well against and still find yourself second-guessing everything you'd done. What made Ginola particularly difficult to plan for was that there was no single defensive approach that neutralised him. Get tight early, and he had the strength and close control to ride the pressure and spin away. Drop off and give him space, and he'd deliver a ball from wide or cut inside and create something from distance. Show him down the line, and he was good enough on the outside to make that uncomfortable too. Most wingers have a preferred option you can identify and take away. Ginola always had another one ready. For Irwin, a defender who built his reputation on being well organised and difficult to beat, facing someone who made him feel second best despite defending well was a specific kind of uncomfortable. Ginola didn't need to humiliate you, just needed to stay one decision ahead of you, and across an entire match, that was enough to leave a mark. That's the mark of someone genuinely elite. Not that they beat you every time, that they made the game harder to play just by being on the pitch. 7 wingers, 7 completely different problems. Ryan Giggs testing him every single week in training. John Barnes combining strength and technique in a way that gave you nothing easy. Chris Waddle making the unpredictable his default setting. Mark Overmars arriving with pace that even the best fullbacks struggled to contain. Steve McManaman drifting into spaces that didn't follow any recognisable pattern. Gianfranco Zola using intelligence and skill to create problems from nowhere. David Ginola making the whole thing look beautiful while doing it. Denis Irwin faced all of them, competed against all of them, and came out the other side with a career full of medals and the honest admission that each one of those opponents pushed him to his absolute limit. That's not failure. That's what it looks like when one of the best fullbacks of his generation goes up against the best wide players of his era and tells the truth about it. Send your thoughts on Irwin and this list in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more stories like this one.